Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to this week's international webcast featuring our founder and president, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. We are in the midst of a series of unfolding developments, and we'll address them in the context of the discussion today. There are a number of things happening, each of which are very significant, and we don't have full readings yet. But we want to start with what I think is something that most people are not aware of, and that is the coming earthquake that's hitting Europe. In this case, from the Italian election. The new government is being put together, and there's a complete freakout from the European Union for good reason. Helga, what is the significance of these Italian developments in the context of the overall strategic situation?
Well, we have now a new prime minister who's a politically unknown legal law professor, but the real freak out is because of the mooted new finance minister, Savona, who is a well-established economist. He was completely for the euro at the beginning, but then when he saw what the consequences were for Italy of the single currency, he became completely anti-euro, and he has demanded a plan B for Italy, meaning leaving the euro, and also he has called the euro a German prison for Italy, and he has given it some worse names. So the freak out is quite incredible. I mean, all kinds of people, politicians, media, have threatened Italy with financial warfare. Basically, one guy said, the markets will teach Italy a lesson and bring it back to the path of virtue. Then one of the key anchors of the second German channel, Klaus Kleber, who is a real specimen of his profession, to put it very diplomatically. He basically said one should use the gag bite. I hope I'm using the right word in English. This is a torturous bit for horses, which no honest horseman would ever use, because it's really torturing horses. So he said one should use that for Italy to basically discipline them. Now, this is incredible. I mean, here are people who are all the time making the hugest complaint about lacking democracy in China and whatnot, and they are openly calling for regime change and using warfare techniques against one of the European Union members. Now, I think if Savona indeed becomes finance minister, people are in for some surprises, because this is an experienced person. He's not a lightweight, what some media were saying about Conte. And, given the fact that this all occurs, this is not an isolated phenomena. It's not Italy causing the financial crisis. This is a long arc of revolt against the neoliberal policies which were expressed in the Brexit, in the election of Donald Trump, in the no to the Italian referendum concerning a change of the constitution last year, in the Austrian election, and now in the Italian election. These are all the results that the populations do not want to submit any longer to these completely unjust austerity regimes, which only benefit the banks, the speculators, and the rich, at the expense of the masses of the population. So I think that this is a very important moment, and rather than being completely shocked about it and having hysterical tantrums, I think the chance should be used to take the positive elements of the new coalition in Italy. They have, after all, both of them in their party platform, and also now in the coalition treaty, two of the basic laws of LaRouche, namely the implementation of Glass-Steagall, and secondly, the creation of a national bank for investments in the real economy. So I think rather than being hysterical about it, one should take this as a golden opportunity to get rid of the kind of extremely dangerous speculative excesses and, go for a unified Glass-Steagall separation of the banks as a first step and start to save the system in this way. So in one sense, this crisis around Italy can be a real chance to change the urgent, to make the urgent change in the direction.
And Helga, I just would like to make a real point of something that you brought up, which is that the people who are arguing against these policies are essentially saying that the voters have no right to express an opinion if it goes against the policy of the bankers. And I think this is really important because the line from the media is that we're in the midst of a robust recovery, things are improving, the European economy is improving. But I think the voters are voting to show that they don't believe that. And there are some important developments. There are continuing problems with the Macron government in France. Deutsche Bank continues to be at the front end of this list of most dangerous banks. So I'd like you to just emphasize this point of the real economy is what's behind the revolt. And that's why the 4 laws of Lyndon-LaRouche are so crucial.
Well, there is an economic website which warns of the consequences of the corporate debt bubble, which is much, much worse than 2008. And they are warning of a new financial crisis of biblical dimensions. Now, I don't know, biblical dimensions, that's the deluge or some other, fundamental crises like that. So, then you have the ongoing crisis around Argentina. The currency of Turkey is falling, forcing the central banks to reverse their interest rate policy. So this is all extremely fragile, and I think very indicative of, that there is an understanding that some changes must be done. Is what just happened at Deutsche Bank. 2 years ago, Mr. LaRouche, my husband, when the Deutsche Bank already was in a severe crisis, demanded that Deutsche Bank should basically change the entire policy since '89, since the assassination of Herrhausen, and go back to their Herrhausen model of industrial banking. Now, at that point, many people thought that this would never happen. The Deutsche Bank is a hopeless case. But, while I don't want to make a final judgment on it, it is a fact that on Monday, the leadership of Deutsche Bank kicked out Krajen. And then in Handelsblatt, the chief economist of Deutsche Bank, David Volkerts-Landau, gave a long interview where he described how it was a big mistake for the last 2 decades to have shifted the entire profile of Deutsche Bank into a complete investment bank, going into the derivative trading. And while he makes some correct points, namely that, Merrill Lynch was brought in and, a team which basically allowed a reverse takeover of Deutsche Bank so that it became completely foreign controlled and, directed to high risk speculation. I think they still have a portfolio of something like 42 trillion derivatives outstanding. I mean, that's the largest derivative bank in the world. Now, what happened just is today there was a shareholder meeting, and they apparently kicked out also Achleitner, the chairman of Deutsche Bank. Now, the only thing I can comment on this Volkerts-Landau is that, as several insiders told us, he, was one of them who changed the bank's profile into the direction of this investment banking only. So he was not criticizing that for the last 2 decades. And, Spiegel Online even says that it was the last effort by Achleitner to have some kind of a, show so that he would not be kicked out by making this mea culpa self-criticism. Now, I think that that is true. And the new chairman is a person called Sewing, who has been in the bank since '89. And he is being said that he will totally concentrate and put the priority on investments in the real economy inside Germany. So turning the Deutsche Bank back into a commercial bank at the service of industry. So one has to see if that actually happens. But I think, the shares were already below 10 euro, and that is generally the red line, when a bank when Deutsche Bank is in danger to go bankrupt. Anyway, I'm just saying this, we are on the verge of a new financial crisis. We are sitting on a volcano. The Vatican the Congregation of the Faith had put out a couple of weeks ago a paper where they said that the derivatives are a time bomb ticking, and they condemned derivative trading as morally and economically completely unacceptable because it just makes the rich richer and at the losses of everybody else. So I think, between these warnings, also Thomas Höning, the former FDIC vice chairman, Sheila Bair, there are many people warning of this. And I think that the Italian developments, as I said, indeed mean the absolute opportunity to get rid of the excesses of the derivative trading, go for banking separation, and the more it is being done in a coordinated fashion, the better, and it must occur really quickly.
And Helga, speaking of Germany, the Chancellor of Germany is in China. Any chance that the weakened and beleaguered Angela Merkel will come back with the new Silk Road spirit?
Well, I don't think so. I think what she will come back with is, the Chinese, as they did with the Trump administration, they promised more opening up for finance, for cooperation concerning e-cars and similar things, automated cars. So I think they will come back with some kind of a package. But as long as the Merkel has this attitude, I mean, she made this statement, which is quoted everywhere, that she regards the rise of China as the biggest challenge for the remaining years of her being in the office of the Chancellor. Now, she is typical of the people who, on the one side, naturally see that without China, nothing functions anymore in the world. But, she is also, a really hardcore geopolitician in her attitude towards Russia. And she always regards China at the same time as a rival. So it's a mixed situation. So I would be very happy if she comes back brimming with the new Silk Road spirit, but I have my doubts.
Well, now we come to probably the most complex of the situations, which is that in the United States, where we just announced this afternoon by President Trump that he is canceling the summit with Kim Jong-un. But this is occurring at a very interesting time where the whole British role in Russiagate and the attacks on Trump is in the open. So why don't we start with that? Because this is something that we have been fighting for. We're going back to the dossier that we put out on Robert Mueller, going back to the investigations that we launched and that we insisted that you have to look at not just Christopher Steele as an isolated case, but as a British-directed assault against the United States. This is moving fairly quickly, isn't it, Helga?
Yes. As a matter of fact, if you look at the recent tweets by President Trump, they are quite to the point, namely that he said that Russiagate turned into Spygate, that there was absolutely no proof of a collusion with Russia, but that now all the people who did the coup, basically, that they created a spider web of collusion between the intelligence heads of intelligence agencies of the Obama administration with British intelligence, and that basically there was an ongoing effort, even before any investigation officially started, by British intelligence figures to connect with all kinds of persons in the Trump election team to try to somehow involve them in some kind of a connection with some Russians. And all of this is coming out now. So there was long before the Trump election victory or anything, or even the nomination, the clear effort by British intelligence to lay leads, to create paper trails, to to manufacture and orchestrate a situation whereby the so-called collusion with Russia was supposed to be hung on the Trump campaign and Trump himself. And this is all now coming out. So I think this is now subject to, public discussions. For example, on Monday, President Trump met with several intelligence heads. I think it was Wray and Rosenstein from the Department of Justice in the White House. And today, as a follow-up of that, John Kelly is meeting with the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice, together with congressmen, for example, Congressman Nunes, Senator Grassley, and they are now having access to all the documents, including the memorandum of Mueller, the scope, the memo defining the scope of Mueller's investigation. So this will all now be made available to the investigative committees in the Congress. And obviously, this is all criminal violations of law and the Constitution. So this is big. I think Trump may absolutely be right when he says that this may become the biggest scandal in the history of America. And, what is now clear is that there was a task force involving an interinstitutional group of people, who orchestrated all of this against in an election campaign. And Trump said, what was done against Bernie Sanders, also was done on a much larger scale against him. And when all of this comes out, I think the world will really be a different place. And I think if President Trump is freed of this spiderweb, I think you will see that he will be in a much better position to carry through with his intentions than you have seen it so far.
And what you're describing is technically called entrapment, that the FBI, or actually John Brennan, Clapper, and then bringing Comey in later, were involved in creating the Russiagate as a collusion with the British intelligence services, the GCHQ, which is signals intelligence, MI6, MI5, and the key people that are being named now, like Stefan Halper, Mifsud, the Downer, the former or the current Australian High Commissioner to Great Britain, all of them are tied to MI6, MI5, private agencies. And this was brought up by Rand Paul at the hearings when he asked Haspel whether or not the CIA was involved in getting evidence from Britain. So a lot of this is coming out. To what extent, Helga, is this then connected to the financial crisis? I mean, make the connection for people, because there's still some confusion about how the financial crisis is then intersecting this operation against Trump because of Trump's willingness to work with Russia and China. So I think it'd be very important for you to give people an understanding of that.
Well, the big question is indeed the fact that China is rising and that China has a strategic partnership with Russia, and that the new Silk Road is now involving 140 nations. And as many statistics have proven, the new Silk Road dynamic is creating already a completely new paradigm. So you have economic growth, you have a dynamic in the science and technology, innovation. So the real momentum in many, many fields is with these new alignments among Russia, China, now India, Japan, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, the China Latin American CELAC connection, the Chinese investments in Africa. So this has created a completely different dynamic in the world. And then you look at the condition of Wall Street, the condition of the City of London, and the absolute turmoil of the European Union. So the geopoliticians basically, they see the rise of China, and they are absolutely desperate to keep their model, but they're incapable of recognizing what are the causes, and therefore they will not be able to correct their policies. I mean, as I said earlier, the attacks on Italy right now, they completely fail to even ask the question, why is it that all the Euro-critic two parties had the best results? It is the same reason, and I want to repeat this, it is the same reason why the Brexit occurred, why the people in the Midwest voted for Trump and against Hillary. And there is an absolute hysterical effort by the people who have made their gigantic virtual fortunes, sometimes not so virtual, but sometimes indeed it's just virtual fortunes, with this highly speculative system, the neoliberal system connected, with wars based on lies, with so-called humanitarian interventions, regime change, color revolution. So that whole model right now is really what is not functioning anymore. President Trump won the election because he promised that he would not do these foreign wars anymore. And you can see, that there are all the time efforts by neocon elements in his administration to lure him back. And therefore I think also the cancellation or postponement of the summit with Kim Jong-un is really unfortunate, because it would have been really better to make, one clear step for peace. And obviously there were also difficulties, in terms of what are the procedures for the denuclearization. But I mean, Kim Jong-un, he released the American hostages. Today, the international press was invited to see the destruction of the nuclear test site. So there are clearly signs of goodwill, and therefore I think it's very regrettable that this meeting was postponed. But hopefully it will come back on the agenda. But the connection is really the fight between the old paradigm, which is not functioning, and the new paradigm, which is basically focused on the common good of the people, on economic growth. And just as a additional element, China just completely abandoned their two children policy by saying that there was a change in the view about population, that they, in the past, when they adopted the one child and then two child policy, thought that additional children are a burden in the economy of limited resources, but that now they have changed their view and they see each new child, especially every young person, as a tremendous asset of creative power, of additional, richness of the entire society. So I think, the values, I mean, look at the difference in the values, and yet then you can really see that this is a fundamental fight for, can mankind govern itself in a reasonable way? And, the danger of a financial collapse hangs over the world, at least concerning the transatlantic part, very much. So I think LaRouche's 4 laws are the absolute urgent question of the hour.
And I think it's important to see also in terms of these two paradigms, you look at what just happened near my old hometown of Houston, Texas, where in Santa Fe High School, you had another one of these mass shootings. These are almost commonplace in the United States right now, whereas in China, you have this total emphasis on education, on science. This really goes back to one of the fundamental economic breakthroughs of your husband, this concept of potential relative population density. And this, of course, is what people like Prince Philip, the genocidal consort of Queen Elizabeth, if he's still breathing, has been committed to his whole life. So, Helga, in this sense, I assume you see this change in China as an absolutely significant recognition of the again, this difference between the two paradigms, but also your husband's view of this concept of potential relative population density.
Yes, I think that, the Chinese have clearly totally changed, starting with Deng Xiaoping and his reforms after the Cultural Revolution. But I think especially in the last 5-6 years with the leadership of Xi Jinping, there has been an absolute understanding about the fundamental issues of life. I mean, he has given the task to the Chinese scientists to find out how the human mind works, what is the origin and importance of life in the universe, what are the laws of the universe. And he has encouraged, especially an emphasis on innovation, on creativity in the education as the source of wealth. And when they now see the connection between qualitative advances in the knowledge about the physical laws and the ability to have more people and more people again leading to more creativity, I think they're absolutely on the right track.
Well, we didn't have a whole lot of time to talk before the program, so I want to make sure if there's something else that you wanted to bring up, you have a chance. So is there anything else on your radar screen?
Yes, there is actually a petition on the website of the White House. This was initiated by the American University in Moscow, by Professor Edward Lozansky and Jim Jatras. And they call for an early summit between President Trump and Putin by making essentially the same point what we have been making for the last several months, that, given the fact that President Trump is still so much, up against neocons in the Republican Party and all kinds of, he's really done a remarkable job under the circumstances, where you have the entire intelligence apparatus, not only of what they call the deep state, which is really an incorrect characterization, because the role of British intelligence is absolutely crucial to understand what makes this empire tick. So, in order to cut through that, and given the fact that the entire Russiagate operation was aimed to prevent a good relationship between Russia and the United States, which Trump all the time said would be a good thing and not a bad thing, and he tries to do it. So the way to cut through this whole thing would be to have this summit, which they talked about, Trump and Putin on the telephone a couple of weeks ago, and do this as quickly as possible. So there is this petition, and I would call all of you who are listening or watching to just sign this petition that such an early summit would take place, because I think it is an absolute important initiative. And if this petition has more than 100,000 signatures until sometimes mid-June, then the White House will have to respond to it and will respond. So otherwise, naturally, there are many, many things. And I would again invite you, join us, join the Schiller Institute, make sure that this webcast becomes more known and is being spread, because we are in an urgent need for a political discourse. Where should mankind go? And, how can we organize the world so that it's safe and beautiful for everybody to live in?
Okay, that's good advice, and I'll just second that. Joining the Schiller Institute is an absolutely crucial expression of your own human sentiments. And so our listeners, many of them have joined, but we want to have a real membership drive, and expanding this webcast is one way to do it. So I would urge everyone to think over the next days of what you can do to make sure this movement succeeds and advances, so that the New Silk Road spirit can be brought to every household throughout this Atlantic region, which otherwise is left with nothing but collapse and depression. So Helga, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week.
Yes, goodbye.